Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mountainside Podcast. Our guest for this episode is Colorado native Denny Behrens. He's spent 35 plus years advocating for sportsmen and Colorado wildlife and their habitats. We headed back over to the Western Slope to sit down with Denny and discuss Proposition 114 and what Colorado may be facing with forced wolf introduction. Denny, thank you for having us over on the Western Slope here. This has been a long time coming. We were supposed to get together sometime back, and life gets crazy sometimes, right?
Oh, absolutely does. And this coronavirus thing has really screwed Colorado's life up for everybody.
It really has, yeah.
But I'm glad for the opportunity to sit down and talk with you now. And, thanks for coming over to God's country, South Dakota.
Yeah, no. I think anywhere inside those state lines, except for where the airport's at, maybe, I label that as Nebraska almost, but yeah, no, we love coming over here. It's such a beautiful drive, across the Rockies and through Glenwood Canyon and all that. And it's a beautiful spot, and we're happy to have you on the mountainside. So I appreciate you. I know this is a really busy time of year for you, and I appreciate you taking out the time to inform our listeners on what's going on. We've been covering this wolf issue for quite a while.
Right.
Since back, I don't even know when we did the first wolf episode, but your organization has seemed to be the most credible and give us the most honest information. So I'm super excited to have you on. Mm-hmm. And before we get started, can you tell people a little bit about your background and what you do for Stop the Wolf Coalition?
Okay. Well, I've been involved in wildlife politics here in Colorado for 36 years. I started out as a area rep for the Colorado Bow Hunters Association, and then that in the late 1980s, going into the 90s, I served as their vice chair of legislation. And of course, right there at 1992, we had Amendment 10, which was the Bear Initiative. And so the sportsmen got together throughout the state, and we had a big meeting, and they decided, hey, I think we better hire Denny to coordinate to get a campaign going. And so they put some money together, and I basically worked on Amendment 10 back then. We had an actual management team and the whole bit. But that particular issue, to me, was the saddest thing that I've probably ever worked on, because the sportsmen of Colorado did not get serious about the fact of losing the spring bear season or the use of hounds. And, I would have thought that the sportsmen at that time would have said, hey, the environmental community is coming after hunting. It's anti-hunting groups, Wayne Pacelli with PETA, and they were all there. And so it was really strange. Back then, Wildlife Legislative Fund of America, which is now the Sportsmen's Alliance, came in and said, hey, we're going to help you guys. If you raise $250,000, we'll get $1 million and we'll defeat this thing. We barely raised $160,000 from the sportsmen and the ag community.
Wow.
And so, we got our butts kicked over that issue. But one of the things that I found out back then that really, really bothered me from the sportsmen was that, I don't bear hunt. It's not my issue. I'm a deer hunter. I'm an elk hunter. I'm a pheasant hunter. I'm a duck hunter. It's not my issue. And look where we're at now. We got
now bears. It is an issue.
We got bears everywhere. And so, and of course, then came Amendment 14, which was a trapping issue. Sportsmen kind of rallied a little better on that one, but we still lost 52-48% on that one. It's close, but we lost. Mm-hmm. And so there's been 2 ballot initiatives in the state of Colorado that I really feel that sportsmen did not get involved with, And I'm kind of seeing that now.
That's what kind of worries me about this whole wolf situation is, I saw some statistics and I quoted something a couple of weeks ago on a podcast with Perry, but basically I had heard, and I don't know if this is true, that only 5% of people that purchased a hunting license are registered to vote in the state of Colorado. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I was hoping maybe you could clear that up for us a little bit.
Back in 1992, we had a major campaign group that did a lot of media survey back then. And, of course, we spent money having them go out and check stuff. And back then it was about 65% of the sportsmen were registered to vote.
That's a much better percentage.
Yeah, but it's still not good because there's over 800,000 sportsmen, including fishermen and hunters in the state of Colorado. If you look at it, that's the largest voting block of a group in the state, and so you would think that those guys, because of the issues and how it affects them, would band together and say, I'm going to get registered to vote. I'm going to vote, and that it's just sad that we cannot get sportsmen unified in this state to say enough is enough. We're going to protect our hunting in this state, because ultimately, if hunting goes down, how's the division going to manage? Where's the money going to come from?
Mm-hmm. Pays for a lot in this state.
Out-of-state hunters basically float the Division of Wildlife. Without their money, you and I pay what, $50 for an elk tag?
Yep.
And they're paying over $600 for an elk tag?
Correct.
Do the math. It doesn't take long to understand that the fact that the non-resident hunter, if we lose them and they don't come here anymore, what are you going to do? Raise taxes?
That brings up my next question. If somebody's out of state and they want to help with this situation, obviously they can't vote in the state of Colorado because they don't live here. What are some ways that they can get involved? I think that there's a big bow hunting community of world-renowned bow hunters that come from, not just bow hunters, rifle hunters, that come from all over the country, sometimes all over the world to hunt here because the elk hunting is so good and it's such a thriving species and it's really well managed by Game and Fish. And we have so much public land to use here too. And to be able to be an out-of-state person and come in and buy an over-the-counter hunting license is unheard of in any other state. Absolutely. And that's going to go away, at some point if those populations start to diminish too much. But what are some ways that somebody could get involved if they were not in the state?
The easiest way is to go to the website, which is stopthepack.org, and they can donate, because if you really care about stopping this anti-hunting movement, and that's basically what it is, they've turned the Canadian gray wolf into a biological weapon. And that's, when you talk to the guys from Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, even now Washington and Oregon, you see it, you hear it, and, even their game departments are starting to realize this is not a good issue. But they can go online and donate to the pack. It's important that we win this issue. If we lose, we'll go right down the same track as what Oregon and Montana and Idaho have done. I've got good friends that live in those states. I've communicated with sportsmen and state legislators up there on this issue for the last 2 years, and they're all saying, if you lose Colorado to the wolf, we lose the West.
Yeah.
And that's basically it.
And here's kind of my take on it. I've done my homework. I've done hours of podcasts with people now, including you and some other people, and talked with a lot of people. I've talked to the opposing side too. And I've actually tried to get them to come on the podcast, and it hasn't been successful, to say that way, whether it's scheduling or their time schedules. But I've given them multiple opportunities with multiple organizations. And this really starts to make me question their argument. Because if they're not going to show up and be able to talk about it for an hour, then what kind of ground do we have to stand on with the left or right? And believe me, I'm not I'm not involved in politics at all. And we went down this path with this show, particularly because we have outdoor-based listeners. That's what the show is about, is preserving the outdoors, using public lands properly, helping preserve our heritage. I want my kids to experience the same things in Colorado that I did growing up.
Absolutely.
And it's already changed. I mean, it's not going to be the same experience. But I'm not really left or right. We don't preach anything like that. And I feel like this issue is much bigger than just a left or a right issue. I think that you really need to look into the hardcore facts of this thing, whether you're on the left side or the right side, Democrat, Republican, whatever. Look at the hardcore facts before you vote on this. And,
that's one of the things that the PAC has done is to make sure that everything that we put out there is factual. And, we've talked to biologists from, British Columbia, Canada, all the way down into New Mexico, where they deal with the Mexican wolf, ranchers from New Mexico all the way to Idaho and Montana, state legislators, about what are the impacts of wolf introduction and what has it done to not only the hunting community, but, the ranching industry, the hardship it's caused, and I think that's one thing that people need to realize is that our Western way of life is totally different than what the West Coast, East Coast is. We live on the land, we live off of the land, and we help preserve the land. And everything that's included in that ecosystem. And that's why it's so important for people to understand, if you live on the Front Range in the I-25 corridor, you live in a different world than what we do over here on the Western Slope. We enjoy the beauty constantly. We don't have to look at concrete, 90% of the day.
Sure.
We don't have to look at steel buildings standing up in the air 90% of the day. We look at the mountains, and we're able to drive and see. We're able to see the livelihood of the West, which made America great back then, and it still is. You drive down a road and you see, and all of a sudden you come on a corner and, oh my gosh, there's a bottleneck. Well, it's a rancher pushing his cows down the road to move them from summer range to winter range, or a sheep rancher doing the same thing. In the spring, you come and you see them pushing sheep up a mountain road, and that's what America's about here in the West. And it's a livelihood. It's what part of it makes this. The romance of the West is something that's so important, and we need to preserve that. But hunting has always been a part of the West. And so being able to talk to people factually about that and not trying to beat people over the head,
Yeah.
I get to the point where I get so irritated when it becomes a fisticuffs almost argument every time you try to talk about the wolf issue or the bear issue or any of these things. Let's stick to the facts and make our decision based off the facts.
Yeah, and our tax dollars employ these amazing biologists and people like Perry that we had on, that have served in Colorado Division of Life for 40 plus years.
Right.
That says something right there. To keep a job for 40 years
Right.
must be a pretty good job.
And
the type of person that has to do that, we should be looking to those people that are boots on the ground and are actually saying, okay, yeah, we're seeing the deer population move up here. Maybe we need to add some more tags, that sort of thing. If all those people are raising their hand and going, wait a minute, we didn't sign up for this wolf thing. We've already told you guys multiple times that this isn't going to work.
Right.
And now it's at the ballot box.
Yeah. And people need to realize that the average public needs to realize your tax dollars don't pay for wildlife management in this state. It's hunting licenses that do. And of course we get money from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. But again, those are tax dollars based off the sale of ammunition, bows, arrows, guns, camping gear, that kind of stuff. It's all generated to come back into the states to help the states manage our big game. And I've been a long time involved in these wildlife politics over the years, and I've seen some major changes take place. And the biggest thing that bothers me is that our resource is going down, and our deer populations. Back prior to 2006, back 2004, we had over 700,000 deer in the state. We have the statistics from the division. I've kept it for years because that's part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been told we'll never get there again. That's sad.
That's disheartening, yeah.
We're barely over 400,000 deer in the state. And, you look at this and say, hey, why? And, our elk populations in the state, some areas, yeah, they're maintaining. But the southern part of the state where I hunt, the San Juans down through that area, I've got good relations with the Southern Utes. They're good people.
Mm-hmm.
I've had major conversations with them this year, and they're telling us the same thing. We're not seeing the elk, and we're not seeing the deer, and populations are dropping, and most of that's due to predators. And of course, we do have problems with, so many people anymore getting out and recreating. I sometimes wonder, was this a scheme for the agenda to help get rid of hunting? Because all it does is push animals onto private property.
Yeah.
So many people get out and recreate, and it's the same thing for me. I don't want to go to Denver. I don't want to be among some people. I just soon get on my horse and go right up here in the mountains where it's quiet.
Sure.
And but things have changed drastically in the last 30 years. And
yeah, I feel like we need to take a few steps back and really look at some of that. And
the big picture.
I think definitely is, if you're a Colorado resident, I think that's part of your duty to live in Colorado, is to step back and look at that and make some of those, try to help politicians make some of those decisions, especially if we're going to have biological issues on the ballots.
Yeah, and that is a huge issue. Ballot box biology, which started back with Amendment 10, has done nothing but cause problem. And, when you get kids being attacked by bears and people dying because they got attacked by a bear, bit because they got attacked by bears, the division has told us over and over again, we cannot control the population of bears anymore in this state. Mountain lions are basically the same thing. How do you control all that? And it's basically done by hunting.
Yeah.
We do have some federal trappers that come in and help with damage claim things on ranches and stuff, or the situation where the little kid got pulled off the trampoline, by the mountain lion.
Mm-hmm.
The CPW brought in the feds, Animal Damage Control, APHIS, and they went after her and got the cat, And so, but those situations, they shouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
We should have a better balance on it. And that's why introducing another apex predator into the state, which is already here anyway,
correct,
makes no sense. Why? Why would we do this to the rest of our wildlife? And more than that, to take the wolf from Canada, go up there and trap them, stick them in a box for 2 weeks, while you're waiting for export papers and everything else to bring them down here, and keep them in a box.
Right.
We
got to look at the ethics of that a little bit. That's come up a few times. And, we had a great podcast with Ted Harvey, and that was kind of one of the first things he said, we really need to think about the ethics of the wolf and the wolf's point of view. They're being taken from a wilderness area or wherever they're coming from, and they're not having any conflicts with humans. There's no cars zooming by on a highway. There's no hikers if they do see a hiker, it's very rare, right? Human encounters.
They're exploited.
You're going to drop them on the western slope where you have ranchers that are not going to be happy that they're there, first off.
Right.
You're going to have highways that run, main arteries of the country run through the state of Colorado, two of them.
Yep.
And, and then not to mention the population here.
Oh, we're almost at 6 million people.
Yeah.
And it's going to grow up to, they're talking 10 million people in 20 years. And you look at that and say, well, here we live in Grand Junction. What's Grand Junction going to look like? When my grandkids get to be 20, 30 years old, what's it going to be like on the West Slope? Where are the animals going to go? And if we don't think very hard about what we're going to do about protecting our wildlife, our habitat for them, that's really huge. One of the things that I'm really proud about is the fact that, when Ron Velarde was the Northwest Regional Manager, him and I co-chaired the group, the committee.
I'm sorry to stop you real quick. Northwest Manager of Colorado Division of Wildlife?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
Just keeping our listeners engaged here.
And, we worked 3 years to get the habitat stamp passed in the state of Colorado. And that was a hard pull. 3 years of traveling around the state, talking to people and getting that engaged. But we had to do it. And we protected some major corridors, through some conservation easements. But if we don't start looking at the impacts of predators on the state, on our wildlife, I'm afraid that the public's going to someday wake up and say, where's our moose? Mm-hmm. We used to have moose days here on the Grand Mesa. Big event, Where'd they go? And, we start to get into this topic about the wolves, and I think that's where we need to go. And I've talked to people from Idaho, Montana, Wyoming. We got data from the Wyoming Fish and Game, actual reports, that in 1996 they had over 10,000 moose in the state of Wyoming. And by 2017, they were down to less than 1,300.
Phew.
And
that's crazy. I've seen those same numbers.
It's still dropping. And, I just talked with Justin Webb from Foundation of Wildlife Management out of Idaho. And there's regions where there's no moose anymore. None.
Yeah.
And, we'll get into the topic of hydatid disease. And
you were mentioning something about that prior to the podcast, that a friend of yours, or I don't know if he was a friend or somebody that up in Idaho drew a moose tag, or was it Montana?
No.
I'm going to let you tell the story.
Okay,
but
well, that's Justin Webb.
Okay.
And back in 2013, Justin finally drew his moose tag, Cyrus moose tag. And he took a video crew, went out, and thought, man, this is going to be great, and he hunted hard trying to find a moose, And he finally found one, about 42 inches, which isn't, that's a good moose, but it's not a big moose,
Sure.
And he shot it, and but when they went to field dress it and opened up, it was full of hydatid cysts, the lungs, the heart, the liver area. And, he looked at this and thought, what the heck? And took it to the division up there, and it was hydatid disease, Echinococcus canadensis, which is the northern strain of that disease. And the division up there then gave him another tag. Said, well, here's another tag for next year. And this was 2013. So 2014, he's back out there. He hunted all season trying to find a moose. Finally found one on the last day. And he said when he put the scope up on the moose, I can't do this. I've hunted a whole season to try and find a moose. He lowered the rifle and he said he got tears in his eyes. And he says, what's happening? What have we done?
Mm-hmm.
And,
just because the moose population has declined so much that he didn't want to take another one, right?
No. And so when I talked to him last week, I just check in with him every once in a while. It's hunting season, so everybody's got to tell a hunting story.
Right.
Whether it's, a little bit stretched, sometimes,
Yes.
like the fishing stories get sometimes. But anyway, he was telling me that now if a hunter, that does draw a moose tag up there, which are very few anymore, if he got almost all the moose, all the elk, all their whitetail are infected with Enconococcus. And he says if they bring it into the division now, they don't get another tag. They don't have that many moose left.
So I'm pretty well educated on it because I went down a big rabbit hole when I didn't know anything about it until I started doing these podcasts. And, I think the first question that comes up when people think of wolves is, wow, what a majestic animal, right? What a cool animal.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
And they're a beautiful animal. And I'm all about having predators. And I think it's important to have predators manage wildlife when there's not hunting seasons and stuff. But those predators need to be managed as well. For the simple fact that issues like this with hydatid disease, and I'm hoping that we can speak on this a little bit because we haven't really dove into this too heavily on the podcast. And it was brought to my attention when I started doing my homework on this and kind of figuring out, okay, what are the real facts to wolves coming to Colorado? And there's a lot of different facts and there's a lot of different concerns, right? And the first concern that came to my mind was, well, how many attacks is there? How many encounters are they going to have with humans here? I started looking at our population ratios comparative to some of these other states like Wyoming and Montana. And if you look at those, it's crazy, right?
Right.
But then you start looking at recorded attacks. There's not a whole lot, right? So I start thinking, well, there's going to be pet loss.
Mm-hmm.
That happens, yeah. Then you get into the ranchers issue, and then, the other side has an argument for that as well, or the left side of the fence there, and, there's reparations and stuff, right? So, but really what opened my eyes and literally, pardon my language, but it scared the shit out of me was when I started digging into the hydatid disease and going down that rabbit hole and seeing how it affects humans and that there's humans that have been affected with it already. In some of our northern states, Montana, Wyoming specifically.
Yep.
And how easily that disease is spread and transmitted and who it's transmitted by.
Right.
So if we can spend some time on that, and I know you've done a ton of homework on it and talked to biologists, doctors, you've veterinarians, all sorts of different people.
Right.
And I want to get your opinion on that and help educate our listeners on that.
I've been involved in the wolf issue for about 7 years here in the state. When I was with the Colorado Mule Deer Association as their chairman, I worked with Big Game Forever out of Utah. And, the first incident of wolves in Colorado was when the feds had the idea they were going to introduce wolves into the Baca down south to help manage the elk population. And, of course, we all knew what was happening in Idaho and Montana about elk. And so we got involved with that and put out major stuff and finally got the feds to back off that and said, hey, wolves aren't going to stay on the Baca. How are you going to do that? Are you going to fence the whole thing? It just was ridiculous.
And explain to our listeners what the Baca is.
That's it's a major national park down in the southern part of the state.
Yeah.
It's west of Alamosa or east of Alamosa, and down the sand dunes area.
Yeah.
And but anyway, getting into the wolf issue, and then I have a very good friend of mine. I met back in 2003. He actually came and spent some time in our home when I was with the Colorado Mule Deer Association, was Dr. Valerius Geis. He is probably one of the world-renowned biologists across the world.
That's where I learned a lot about hydatid disease.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great man,
Yeah.
And, I had the opportunity to talk with him back then. He was in our home, and I corresponded with him. And then, what really got me was he came in when I was working with Big Game Forever. We hosted a symposium here in Grand Junction. I had him as one of our speakers. We had Scott Rockholm from Idaho, Tim Kimmery from Idaho came down to talk about wolves. And I knew about the hydatid disease, the fact that Kimmery and Rockholm were telling us this is a bad, bad thing. But we really started digging into it, and especially with Dr. Geis. And what we found out was that Idaho, back in 2006, sent 7 wolf intestines down to CSU here in Colorado to test for hydatid disease. And 4 of the 7 wolves were actually carrying the strain G8 and G10, which is Echinococcus canadensis. That's
really
the northern strain of that disease.
So it's already in the state of Colorado.
Oh, yeah, I can show you that in a minute here.
Man.
But
Okay.
the thing is that when they did that study, and Dr. Ballweber was the one that did it, it really opened everybody's eyes, because that disease is a tapeworm disease, very, very small. And it ends up being the fact that wolves' canines are the main character of that disease. They're a vector of it. And worldwide, this is the thing that people don't know here. We're so insulated here in America about what really goes on out in the world. And but in the wildlife arena, Echinococcus grandulosus, or the northern strain canadensis, is worldwide. And people die from that. Over 1 million people are affected with it yearly.
Wow.
And especially the indigenous tribes in Alaska, people die from that. And it's for your listeners, they probably don't know what it is, but the wolf carries that disease, okay? It's in their intestinal tract. It's a tapeworm. And when they defecate on the ground, that feces contains thousands of those little eggs. And of course, the sun comes along, dries up, the scat, and it can become airborne. Or the rain comes and spreads it into the grass. And so, an elk, a deer, a moose comes along and eats it, the grass, they ingest it into their system. And once it's into the intestinal tract, it takes about 7 to 10 days for the eggs to hatch. Then the larva bores through the intestinal wall and will attach to the heart, the liver, the lung area, and it can go to the brain. And so it's a long process as the cyst continues to grow. But the ultimate is death. Everybody knows that's in the scientific world knows that the ultimate is death. And so when you start to look at this thing as what's happened in Idaho and Montana, and with Kimmery and Dr. Evans, those guys up there, hey, wait a minute, how did we get this? And so Idaho and Montana sent 123 wolf intestines to University of Washington between the 2 states, and sent them up there and said, test this. It's the same results. It's Echinococcus canadensis. It's the northern strain. Well, how the hell did we get that? How did we get that? And in their documentation, it says this was never known before in Idaho or Montana. And so Scott Rockholm, bless his heart, the guy almost went nuts, researching everything. But he did 4 requests in Canada and got the test results from the veterinarians up there. And we have the documentation. I got over 92 copies of wolves that were tested.
Wow.
And I've showed it to Dr. Dick Steele out of Delta, Colorado. I showed it to Dr. Jennifer Chatfield, who's a very well-known researcher and veterinarian, nationally known. Sent her all this stuff. We have a letter from her that spells this out, and she tells everybody this is dangerous. This could end up affecting people's lives. And so the key thing about that statement from the University of Washington this was never here. And so how did we get it? So the wolves that were brought in from Alaska, Canada, basically Canada, supposedly were brought in by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and a couple of NGO groups, Ted Turner's Endangered Species Fund. These guys are supposed to be major biologists.
Right.
You think about that. They saw those test results. They knew something was wrong with those wolves. What did they do? They released them anyway.
Yeah, it's frightening.
It is.
I mean, is there any sort, in your research, for the wolves that are coming to Colorado, if they do get voted in, has this issue been brought up on a bigger scale, like what if? And I'm sure that those conversations are probably going to be happening months after the actual election, But if wolves are getting reintroduced, is there some sort of vaccine or something that can stop the Hydatid disease from whatever wolves we're putting in?
Okay, let's back up just a second. The wolves that have already come across the border from Wyoming, the pack that was found up in Moffat County, okay, CPW went up, gathered scat, and tested the DNA to make sure, whose wolves are they? Well, the DNA came back and said, yep, that's the Canadian gray wolf, the ones that were introduced.
Wow.
So we requested, hey, you need to test for disease. And so it ended up finding out in that scat that those wolves are carrying Echinococcal canadensis, the northern strain, which is the serious strain. And so wolves in Colorado have been migrating into the state, documented since 2004, when that first female was dead on I-70. They've been coming in and out of the state ever since then. And there's thousands of reports that the division has concerning sightings of wolves.
I know there's been a huge increase in it in the last couple months because of everybody recreating, so they're just out more and pushing them out of wherever they're maybe held up, And,
right. So now we have this particular disease that's being spread into Colorado. And the seriousness of this, which Dr. Geis pointed out, was the fact that if your dog is out there recreating with you, and anymore, I mean, my wife and I ride our horses quite a bit, and when you get out there on the trail, the next thing you see is a family coming, and their dog's not on a leash, it's out running, okay? And so if their dog rolls in that scat, and that's what dogs do, everybody knows that.
God, if I could keep my little puppy from eating elk crap and all those stuff that it does, I'd be a happy man. And we got a lot of it where I'm at. So,
and so the situation is that your dog goes out there, and by accident, whether you're a rancher with your sheepdog, or if you're out with your family, I mean, the mountains are full of people right now recreating with their dogs. And the dog goes and rolls in that scat. The family doesn't know it. So all of a sudden, the fur becomes contaminated with the eggs. And the dog jumps in the car with the family. Okay? And this is what Dr. Valerius Geis tried to tell people. He testified in Idaho and Montana about this in their state legislatures. Once you bring that disease into the family arena, it is very easy for the family members to be contaminated. Look at kids. I mean, they pet the dog,
They're dirty little things, aren't they?
I mean,
I got 3 of them. So.
I can't stand to see a dog lick somebody in the face. I mean, anymore since I've known more about diseases. Wait a minute, folks. And Dr. Geis told me, he says, our culture here in America is so different than the rest of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, he's from Germany, at that area. And over there, your dog don't come in the house. Your dog does not sleep on your bed. You wash your hands every time you come in the house. If you're with cattle or anything, you wash your hands. And right now we're kind of on the same thing, wash your hands with Corona and all that stuff. But he said, he lost a family member to Echinococcus
Wow.
in Europe because of the dogs. And the wolves are the ones that are basically carrying it. If you go back and study this, and that's what I would say to your listeners, there's a lot of propaganda.
There's a couple different strains, just to be clear, so make sure that you're studying the right strain.
Absolutely.
Because if you go on CDC's website or something like that, it's very misleading. Like I went down that rabbit hole too, and all the facts are not there.
Well, it's new, and it's only been here for 20 years, or so, since 1996, 95, when they introduced them. But ranchers are now getting, in Idaho and Montana, what are we going to do with this? And the thing that people don't realize is that now, because the wolf has been such a predator on the elk populations, especially even around Yellowstone, I mean, the elk populations dropped drastically. A lot of them have moved out. But one of the things that was really interesting that we found out was Montana Fish and Game put out a report to a lot of the small towns around Yellowstone. Keep your dogs in at night.
Really?
Because wolves are roaming through the towns at night. Well, what does a wolf do when it comes into town?
Yeah.
It defecates on the ground. Could be in a schoolyard, and that's what Dr. Chatfield says. Our kids are the most, vulnerable to this because we love dogs. America loves dogs, and I don't have a problem with that, But the situation is that if this disease is going to continue to spread, the public doesn't even know about it. And yeah, it takes 5, 6, 7, 10 years for the cyst to develop inside the body. But when I was working for Big Game Forever in January of 2019, I took a video crew and we went to Idaho and interviewed a lady that contracted that disease. And she went through hell. I mean, she didn't know what she had. She got sick. And when they, first went in and said, oh, you've got a cyst on your liver. And, that happens periodically to people that get cysts, so we're going to exasperate it out and it's going to go away. Well, a few months later, she got pain again. They go back and check, and it's back up to the size of a grapefruit.
Wow.
And so they exasperate it again. Well, the thing that you have to be careful about is if you break that cyst open inside the body, it goes everywhere. And so the third time it happened, now she's got major pain in her chest. Her husband, who's a doctor, and she's a nurse, he says, wait a minute. He says, we're not exasperating this again. He says, I've done research, and I found out about this disease. The only way you can get rid of it is to surgically remove it. They ended up in Seattle and to a doctor that he'd only done 5 cases in America. And where the heck have you been?
Wow.
How did you get this? Well, what we come to find out in the interview is that wolves were killing elk right in their backyard. They were defecating on the ground. She either got it because her husband went through the yard with a lawnmower and threw the eggs up in the air, and she ingested it, or she got it digging in the garden. And so, praise the Lord, she's doing okay, but she lost half her liver. I mean, they went in and cut the whole thing out,
Yeah.
And so if you start to do research on this disease, and believe me, I'm not here to fearmonger. I told people from the very beginning, I told the people I've been working with, we're not going to fearmonger this issue. We're just going to tell the facts. And people better wake up to the fact that this is real. We never had this before, and now it's here, and now it's in Colorado. And if you think that you can take your dog out there anymore and just let them run free, I mean, we've got sightings all across northern Colorado now. And it's scary because,
Not to mention it can I mean, it can decimate a wildlife population, right?
you know.
When it comes to elk or deer, or
Absolutely.
moose or something like that, I think is a huge
2000
one. And not to mention that livestock.
Absolutely. 2017, up in North Park, Colorado, up in that area, the division got a call from a family up there saying, hey, there's a cow moose walking around, falling down, running into stuff, looks terrible. And so the DWM goes up there and looks at it and says, oh, yeah, they found it. So they shot it, cut the head off, thinking, oh, yeah, it's got CWD. When it got to CSU, it didn't have CWD. It had hydatid cyst in the brain. We have the report from CPW.
Wow.
So it's here already, okay? And it's in our wildlife. And, so what are we going to do? Dr. Chatfield says, you remove the vector. I respect that woman for what, she's a Colorado girl, but she's pretty well known in the veterinary world, and she has told us that. And, of course, Dr. Geis said the same thing, and so does Dr. Evans and a bunch of other people we've talked to, Will Graves, and a lot of them are saying, what have we done to our wildlife by allowing this to happen? And what have we done to put a health and safety issue out there for our families? You can't sit there and say, oh, this is the best thing we've done. We've introduced wolves into this. You cannot introduce the wolf into the state of Colorado and think that you're going to inoculate that wolf when we already have it present here. And I'll guarantee you that, there's not going to be any racist thing on wolves. I mean, you're an infected wolf, and I'm not an infected wolf. I'm not going to mate with you.
Right.
That ain't going to happen. They will mate.
Yeah.
They'll breed, and they'll spread that disease.
Man, it's I think that's the scariest thing with this issue. Out of everything that we've done, and I appreciate you speaking on that. What have we learned from other states that have wolves right now, like Idaho, Montana? I think that we're very fortunate as Colorado right now, and especially with this issue coming up, that we have those other states to look to and see what they've gone through and some of the issues that they've had. Besides hydatid disease, what are some other, underlying stuff that people may not be aware of or should be concerned about? I think hydatid is number one for me personally. But like number 2, number 3 in line,
Well, again, because I've been involved in wildlife all my life, okay? I mean, I've been a hunter since 10 years old. And to look at wildlife and the fact that us as sportsmen, our biggest thing is to, make sure that we have abundant wildlife, not just for us to hunt, but for everybody to enjoy, and you look at the populations, like the Lobo herd of elk in northern Idaho. Their Fish and Game says it's gone. They don't know if they'll ever get it back. And there's other places like that. It was always great if you went to Yellowstone and you saw all those elk. Now, granted, you couldn't hunt up there. I mean, and that's another myth that really bothers me from the pro-wolf people.
Sure.
They try to compare Yellowstone with, northern Colorado, northwest Colorado. Okay.
It's an entirely different country. If anybody spent any time there and here, it's entirely different country.
Let's talk the facts, okay?
Yeah.
Number one, there was no hunting involved inside the park, okay? There was some hunting outside the park. Very limited, okay? Mm-hmm. Granted, yeah, we had 19,000 elk up there at one time, okay? There's no cities, there's no towns, there's no major highways through there. There's no ranching inside there, okay? How do you compare that and say, oh, it's the same as northwest Colorado? It is not. No way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've got towns and hamlets and, small communities.
And another thing that people don't really realize, from where like Grand Tetons National Park starts, right?
Mm-hmm.
South of there is wilderness area for miles, almost to the Colorado border.
Mm.
North of that, Grand Tetons borders Yellowstone, basically. I think there's maybe a 5-mile gap in between them. So you have this vast range that spreads all the way up into Montana. That is a much larger park than just
Yeah.
than just right there, and
Right.
the wolves don't recognize boundaries.
Oh.
They don't recognize state lines. They don't recognize,
Yeah.
park boundaries or anything like that.
Ask the people in New Mexico and Arizona about the Mexican wolf. How do they read signs down there?
Yeah.
Here's a pretty interesting story. Was that, which I found out that the White Mountain Apaches were opposed to wolf introduction. Okay, we don't want them on our property. The feds came in and said, "Oh yeah, let's release wolves on that should be part of your ancient history, all this kind of crap." There's a lot of bullshit involved in that. Let me tell you. You find that out from the Utes in a hurry. So, but they said, no, we don't want them. You're not going to release on, we're a sovereign nation. You're not going to release them here. So what did the feds do? I mean, the Apaches got cattle.
Right.
Okay. You can go on to Wolves and Government Clothing. You can go on YouTube and see that video, and you'll see one of those guys from the Apaches talking about this. So what did the feds do? They went out right outside the reservation and released wolves.
Mm.
Where did they go?
Right on the res, yeah.
Okay. How do you trust that? So there's so much of that kind of junk that's been going on, and if you're going to end up decimating elk populations and deer populations, especially moose, good grief, the money we've spent to introduce moose into the state of Colorado. It's like Valerius Geis said, that there's only 2 places now in the entire lower 48 where the Cyrus moose isn't. I mean, it's indigenous to the Rocky Mountain region.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the Cyrus moose is. He says it's on the verge of going extinct if you don't do something about the wolf, because that's their. I can guarantee you, if a wolf sits down for dinner on the menu and you got deer, you got cattle, you got elk, and you got moose, the first thing they're going to eat? Moose. And that's what everybody has seen. Moose populations are dropping. They go after, they always say, oh, they only go after the weak and the old.
Yeah, there's a myth that it's going to cure chronic wasting disease and stuff like that too.
Yeah,
and
such a lie.
If you read into that, from what I found, there is no proof of that. And actually, anything that I've read or seen or any studies that has happened, it's been the opposite actually of what they're claiming.
Right.
It actually helps carry and spread the disease even more.
Absolutely. There's a major study that was done on coyotes with chronic wasting disease. And again, people, your listeners, let's just step back and think for a minute, okay? If a coyote is carrying chronic wasting disease, the prion, in its digestive system, which it ate, okay, the thing stays alive. It's there, okay? It defecates on the ground, all right? The rain comes, and it dissolves and it goes all over the place, okay? Do you really think the wolf is any different?
Yeah.
It's going to eat an infected animal, and the average traveling distance is 100 miles, okay? So if the wolf killed the elk in Moffat County or Rio Blanco County, or the deer, and it's got chronic wasting disease, and it ends up traveling toward Estes Park, and it ends up defecating on the way, what has it just done?
Yeah, it's a host.
It's an intelligent being, okay? It doesn't take long to common sense to kick in and say, hey, wait a minute, that is actually happening. It's the same thing with Echinococcus hydatid disease. They are spreading it. And so there are a lot of myths out there on the wolf thing that people need to realize. I don't want to see the situation of us lose our moose like Wyoming's doing. I mean,
it baffles me that we make decisions like this sometimes to. Well, I guess we don't. CPW, who's reintegrated the wolf, reintegrated the moose, and spent all this time and taxpayers' money and stuff like that, has flat out said Colorado is not the spot for gray wolves,
right.
particularly. Now, if they naturally migrate in here, they've been open to that. We'll figure out how to manage it, whatever. But to drop them off or blanket the state with wolves, frankly, is going to destroy that population that they built up.
Yeah, and so, when you read the initiative, okay, it says they're going to be released on public lands on western Colorado. Okay, so again, just like El Coyote or anybody else, how many signs do they read?
Yeah,
they don't read signs, right? It's so crazy. So they're going to be on federal land, all right? And so currently, the wolf federally is on the endangered species list. Okay, so you're going to pass an amendment that says you're going to release wolves when the federal government can step in and say, no, you're not going to do that. What are you going to do about the wolves that end up on federal land when they say, hey, you can't do this? You've already put the poor wolf in jeopardy. He didn't come here to do that. He didn't even going to come here in the first place. He'd just soon stay in Canada or Alaska where he can roam free and stay away from people.
Yeah.
And you're going to bring him into a population of almost 6 million people, and then you're going to dump him on state lands. That's what it says. And believe me, right now, you need to understand that CPW's authority and the Wildlife Commission has authority over parks and state wildlife areas.
That's a good point.
They don't have authority over, Colorado National Monument right out here, How are you going to control the wolf? You're going to cause that poor animal to be in conflict from day one. And, granted, he's a predator, and he will do what he needs to do to survive, all right? But if that means that he ends up getting chased by something or a highway he can't cross because there's too much traffic or something, he ends up on somebody's personal property, now you got a liability situation. The federal government says you can't touch that wolf.
Right.
Don't you dare shoot it. You go to jail. Okay?
Yeah.
And so we are going to cause a conflict with the federal government, and you're going to put a rancher or a family member that wants to protect their dog or something. I mean, look at that poor family up at Banff Park this summer.
Yeah, that was a crazy story for people that don't know, and I think we've brought it up on the podcast before, but basically a family camping in Canada, in Banff, BC, and they're sleeping at night in their tent in a campground, I believe, too.
Yep.
And they wake up to a wolf trying to drag one. I don't know if it was trying to drag the kid out of the tent or it was the dad or
the dad got in front of the two boys and the wife was in there, and the wolf had a hold of the dad and was dragging him out of the tent. And you can go on a number of different pods, different websites to see the whole story. And praise the Lord, the neighbor that was camped with them came out of his camper, and the wolf was backing out of the tent, dragging the guy, and it kicked it, and the wolf let go of him. And the father and the guy pick up rocks and start throwing it. Well, if you're not following that story now, Banff Park has restricted camping now in those areas because wolves are roaming through the campsites.
Really?
And it's just like what Montana did in towns right now up there. Telling people, keep your dogs in. Don't walk your dogs at night. What have we done? What has the federal government done?
And who do you think is the main driving force behind pro-wolf organizations and people that want wolves here in the state of Colorado? What?
All you have to do is go to the Secretary of State's website, okay? And so, you know, Naomi Dobbs she's a gal from down at Cortez area and Durango. She did a very good article in the Range magazine, did a tremendous amount of research. And, you know, she brought it to our attention right away, you know, the fact that you need to go on their website and see who the Rocky Mountain Wolf, you know, project is. Who is that? Of course, we knew it was Center for Biological Diversity, Sierra Club, all the major anti and radical environmental groups. But as those groups, they're not filed as a 501c3. They are under the umbrella of the Tide Center. The Tide Center is filed as the 501c3. The Tide Center is directly tied to George Soros. They're a money laundering group, the Tide Center for the environmental community. If you go on the website and look at who donated, over $350,000 was kicked in right away. Almost maybe it's down to 80% now, but almost all the money that's been donated into this wolf issue is out-of-state money from radical environmental foundations.
And why do you think what is the driving force behind that in your opinion? I mean, I have my own opinions, but
you know, you get asked that a lot, you know, and people worry about, Denny, you're just a conspiracy guy. And I'm thinking, you know, you got to look at the facts. What the hell's going on with our country right now? Who's trying to destroy America? It doesn't take long to find out George Soros is one. You know, I'll probably wake up tomorrow with a lawsuit in front of me or something. I don't know. Right. I don't care.
Right.
You know, bring your own body bag. That's the way I feel about it. So, you know, it's amazing. I mean, I think Will Graves and Jim Beers, you know, both these guys are highly respected throughout the entire wildlife community, okay? Especially Will Graves and even Jim Beers, but they called the wolf a biological weapon that was introduced. Look at the chaos it's caused to ranching. It has shut families down that were in the outfitting business. It has shut ranchers down in some areas. Think about this. If wolves are defecating in your hay pasture, okay, because you've got, you've got elk coming out of the high country now, and they're down in your hay pasture, and of course that happens a lot, okay? So the wolf follows the elk down into your hay pasture, and now they're defecating in it, and now you're going to bail it up.
Yeah, because I mean, there's so many different avenues you can go down with this issue, and I feel like we need to put the brakes on seriously. And I feel like with everything that's going on in the country right now, between coronavirus and the presidential election and stuff, that this might kind of slip under the radar, and that's why we've spent so much time covering it. And like I said, we're not a politics show by any means,
right.
But this affects outdoor life, whether you're a rock climber, mountain biker, I don't care what you do, hunting, fishing. This is going to change what we know as Colorado. And it's definitely, maybe not so much in this first wave of it, but definitely generations down the road.
You know, it only took 20 years. And look at what's happened in Idaho and Montana. You know, Idaho Fish and Game says all elk and deer and moose are contaminated, infected with that now. I mean,
really?
Yeah. That's what Justin was just telling me. And all wolves are carrying it. So, you know, Tim Kimmery and Dr. Evans out of Idaho, Custer County, were the first ones to really sit down and seriously start to study the disease and to do tests and make sure, is this thing real? And all of a sudden,
if people, our listeners, want to learn more about this, do you have any recommendations on where they should go to get the most factual information? Because there's information out there that's not so factual too.
Absolutely. I mean, sure, I'm going to say, go to Stop the Wolf Pack. There's a tremendous amount of information there.
And that's stopthewolfpack.org?
.org.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, but you can also, just Google hydatid disease and check and see worldwide how that is. The statistics that we got from them, a lot of people don't care much about the WHO anymore.
Right.
But the problem is, all their history and all their data, there's a lot of really sound biologists that were involved in all that disease control stuff. And when they talk about hydatid disease, Echinococcus granulosus or Echinococcus canadensis, which is that's the worst strain, they're telling everybody that wake up. The worst thing to me that can happen is the fact that some families out there, 10 years from now, if wolves get introduced, and the wolves are still coming across the border, because so far, they're covered under the Endangered Species Act, and I don't know. I know the Trump administration's trying to get it delisted, but if it follows course like it has for the last 15, 20 years, there'll be a lawsuit filed and where it's going to drag on again, okay? So the problem is the fact that now somebody's kids are going to be out with their dog, okay, and the dog rolls in that scat. They don't know it.
Yeah.
The kid climbs in the truck and the kid's petting the dog, pick up an apple or a candy bar or whatever, and they start eating it, and they ingest those microscopic eggs.
Yep. And we're already dealing with enough already. It's frightening, man. And I don't mean to frighten our listeners, but I think that it's useful information. I think people should know about this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your time. I know that we're actually coming up on our time. You have some other stuff scheduled today.
Sure.
And I appreciate you taking out some time in the morning, and we don't need to rush out of here. Is there anything else that you wanted to let our listeners know, or I think we know what your personal opinion is on the wolf situation,
yeah.
But do you have anything like that you would urge, being a native Coloradan and spending as much time as you did here in the wilderness and advocating for wildlife populations? My biggest take on it is I urge people to go out and get educated.
Absolutely.
Right? You can make your own decision at the ballot box. I'm not trying to force your hand on checking which box, but just to educate yourself before you go check that box, please.
You can't vote on emotions, okay? Our country, our state, we're in some very, very tumultuous times right now. And to vote on an emotion right now because something's warm and fuzzy, you need to think about the consequences of that. And I would hope that your listeners would dig in. Granted, I've been involved in these wildlife issues for a long time, and it's near and dear to my heart. But we're talking to an intelligent audience out there. These people aren't stupid.
Yeah. I agree.
They make decisions every day, based on their livelihoods and everything else. So why wouldn't you test and find out the facts about this particular issue? Why do we want to do something that's going to cause harm? Why does the Front Range want to vote on something that's going to cause harm to the people that live over here? Right off the get-go. Why would you want to vote on something that takes a species from its home where it doesn't have any problems and dump it here in the western slope of Colorado. And granted, we ain't got 6 million people over here. Praise the Lord for that.
Right.
But the fact is that the wolf's going to be in conflict from day one. It ain't fair.
Yeah, it's not fair to the wolf,
No.
for sure.
I know. So thank you for the opportunity, and I just pray that people realize that wildlife management belongs to the professionals, and they've made a decision in this state at least 4 times to say no to wolf introduction. And I mean, there's some of the best people in the nation that we have here in this state that manage our wildlife. They're good people. From the DWM to the biologists, I mean, even to the technicians.
Yeah, and to point out, I mean, you work with these people and have for many years,
yeah.
right? I mean, a lot.
We've worked on bills and stuff together through there. And, it's important that people realize that they know what they're talking about. They've studied it. They know all the aspects of it. Leave it in the hands of the professionals. Do not go to the ballot to vote on something that you don't really know about.
Yeah. Another thing that frustrates me, and I don't mean to go on and on and on, but I'm thoroughly frustrated with the situation, and this is why we've spent so much time on it. And, once, if this does get voted in, once it does happen, once you start this process, there's no turning back from it, right? Mm-hmm. You can't just change a bill or change another law, which typically happens in politics, right?
Well,
something gets passed, something doesn't work, we change it.
Yeah.
This is a much bigger level. Once that cat's out of the bag and there's wolves roaming, it's going to be very hard to go back the other way. So
yeah,
we need to look at it a lot harder than
try and go out and annihilate them again.
Yeah.
I just wish that the people would think through this situation and realize that wolves being introduced into Colorado that are already here, we don't need to compound that issue. We don't need to compound that problem. Colorado doesn't need another problem right now, and especially in the wildlife arena.
In the money situation, too. I mean, we didn't even go down that road, but I think our deficit right now is $3.3 billion,
and it's going to get worse next year. And so, we've already been told that. I mean, I talk to a lot of legislators over the years and stuff, and it's not good. In the wolf situation, if we've got 10 million people, do you not think if wolves are introduced into this state that somebody's not going to get attacked by wolves?
Right.
Give me a break.
Yeah. Yeah, we definitely, I would urge people to also look at where wolves are at currently, and what those population numbers are in comparison to what Colorado's are. Perry made a great point on the podcast we did with him, saying that I think Jeremy had looked up the population of Wyoming, and it was this.
Right here.
Okay, yeah.
It's Wyoming's 550,000. Idaho is 1.75, and Montana is nearing 1 million.
And what was the point that Perry brought? He said, the city of Lakewood, right?
Yeah, Lakewood's got.
It's the same as the population of Wyoming. So I mean, you just put that in perspective, and we're not talking about Boulder and Fort Collins and Greeley. The state's grown a lot, and I think to the tune of I've heard 10,000 people a month increase. So there's definitely an increase here. So I think we definitely need to look at that, and we just need to make logical decisions, especially for our future, especially if you're an outdoors person, which you pretty much have to be if you live in Colorado. If you don't, you're not taking advantage of what I think you should,
Right.
But to each his own on that. But I mean, there's so many people that recreate here too, so it just doesn't affect hunting and other. It affects everyone.
Yep, absolutely does. And if we're going to continue to try and make Colorado the special place that it is, then people need to think about, what are we going to do? I think people are going to say, wait a minute, I'm going to vote no on Proposition 114.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Denny. I really appreciate your time. I know we got to let you go. But before we do, can you tell us where, if somebody wants to get in touch with you or your organization, if they want to get some more information on what you guys do and how to support you, where would you do that at?
Okay, I would tell them again to go to Stop the Wolf Pack. The main thing, it's just like any other political campaign, and I hate to call it a political campaign. To me, it's a conservation campaign.
I agree.
That they can go there and donate, because the key thing is to educate the populace as to the facts. And so, stopthewolf.org or Stop the Wolf Pack would be the best place to go. And, it's pretty easy to get a hold of me. I mean, it's Denny at stopthewolf.org. It's a pretty easy email. I get quite a bit of stuff every day, but I just think, and I'll say this and close, I worry about Colorado for my grandkids. I mean, I'm going to be 72 years old on Monday. And
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I never thought I'd get this far. Thanks to my wife, I am. So anyway, but when I think of my sons and my daughter and my grandkids being able to go out and enjoy the things that I've enjoyed here in Colorado, especially in the wildlife arena, people need to get serious about how we're going to keep that.
I'm concerned too. I mean, that's something I learned, life lessons in the wilderness, doing certain things like hunting and fishing and just being outside and enjoying what Colorado has to offer, especially for a young person. And I think that there's a perspective that you can gain out there that you can't get from a book or a video game or a YouTube video or an Instagram page. It puts a value on certain things, and it puts life in perspective. I mean, every time I go elk hunting or deer hunting or whatever, it definitely makes you realize, like, oh, maybe all the stuff that I thought was so important probably isn't that important.
Yeah. I mean,
it's a definite reset.
When you get out there this time of year, and it's amazing how God's created this world, and the fact that the changing seasons and the colors, and there's nothing to me that's more thrilling than to be out there in the high country and hear that bull elk bugle. That sound resonates nature to me. It's the ultimate. And I've had a successful life hunting. I've taken some nice animals and fed my family, but there's just something about the peace and the solitude of being out there to enjoy that. And if we don't protect that, it will be gone.
Yeah, and it's really up to us. I mean,
absolutely,
100%. And I think the biggest way you can have a voice right now is voting.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Hey, thanks for the opportunity.
Denny, thank you very much for your time. You guys have been more than hospitable, and I really appreciate what your organization's doing and the way that you guys approach it. I highly urge, whether you're a liberal, Democrat, Republican, conservative, whatever it is, when it comes to politics, go check out your website, at least get some information there. And then if you don't like what you get there, there's other places to go get more information and try to figure it out for yourself. But just educate yourself. So,
yep.
Thanks again for your time. I appreciate it. And maybe next time we won't be so serious on the podcast. Maybe we can just tell hunting stories or
Absolutely.
something.
There's a lot of great things out there, but I'm glad you had a chance to come over to God's country on this side of the mountain.
Oh, I love it over here. I kind of grew up on this side of the mountain anyways, even though I always lived on the other side and my family homesteaded that side. I've spent so much time over here, and I'm not going to name spots because I don't want to ruin it any more than it
Yeah.
already is. But as soon as the record button goes off, we'll talk about
Yeah.
some flat top areas and stuff
Sure,
like that.
you bet.
All right, Denny, thanks again, and thank you everybody for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.